that the rate of speed by which inspired change can make a difference is going to catch up to a lot of stuff that's happening today. We still have police killings happening every single day. We have people being killed by domestic terrorism. I mean, we're not going to be able to solve all this in the 2019-2020 season.
Yeah, but don't you want to get started?
Well, no, let's get started. What I'm saying is, in the interim, people are going to want to say, I may want to take a knee, or I may want to make a statement.
But that's
about this outside
that's
of
what
this.
our Inspired Change platform is, to continue to show what's going on in those communities and what we can do to try to help it, and what our players are doing to make the change. And that's what we're doing, and that's why we continue to work with our Players Association, the Players Coalition, to try to say we're not walking away from that. We're actually putting more resource in. We're bringing more partnerships to bring not only awareness but change.
Yes, can you just speak about the role that Robert Kraft played in brokering this deal?
Yeah, I think that we, through our work with prison reform, and I think he saw how serious we were in the room, and we've had a relationship before, and we basically talk. Actually, no one mentions, with all due respect, no one mentions Adam Levine in this whole thing and his role that he played in this. You know, we all talk about Cap because that's, you know, that's a hot button issue, but you know, this is an entertainment company as well. We also discuss what happened at the Super Bowl, right? Because that was one of the things that sparked this conversation as well. What happened at the Super Bowl? And I explained to them how the process went with the Super Bowl and myself, and what I felt about it. And we were, again, frank conversations, super clear. We had super frank conversations, and you know, it slowly evolved from there. So how do we fix it? And I sat with Roger and I was like, man, if this is about me playing the Super Bowl, then we might as well just end this meeting now, because that's not enough. You know, we need to, you guys have a platform, you know, people are upset. You know, private citizens for me, with everything that's going on in the country, private citizens are the one that's going to have to push things forward, working together like we do with reform. We're not relying on government to do it. Okay, let's take this group of people and let's introduce these bills and see what we can do. You know, let's take Team Rock, like, you know, Team Rock organization we started. Let's take current events where people are getting in trouble every day and it's on the news cycle, and let's stop a little boy from getting arrested for singing the national anthem in school. That's a real thing, you know, so that's how the whole thing came about. It was like, let's make it bigger than that. Let's use this platform to really inspire change, and you know, let's put on some great performances.
And even the entertainment.
Will you be performing as well?
Not this year, no.
But even just to go to Jay's point, it's even entertainment well beyond the Super Bowl, as you saw from Asia's presentation. We're talking about engaging our players. We're talking about using our events, all our events, the draft, the Super Bowl, the Pro Bowl, the kickoffs, to be able to use this partnership and have it come to life. It's just not Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Commissioner, I know, well, you and the NFL, and Jay, you and Rob, I'm sure have thought about how you'll measure success of this program. Can you give us any insight on what success will look like for this program?
I don't have a number. It's not a number. Like with reform, we got 1 million people, which is a nutso number, right? I don't have a number, but I'm sure that we'll reevaluate as this thing go along. How many people are we touching? How many people are we reaching? We're constantly looking at the you know, the metrics and all the numbers of what's happening and who we're touching and who we're speaking to and who's participating and how many impressions has it had and how many people that are affected in real time, like real. So we'll keep evaluating that as we go along. Yeah.
Tiki, I just add to what Jay said, elevate the entertainment too. I mean, we always want to get better, and we think we can do that. We got the best in the business right here. So we think we can do that, but the impact is really important. And as I've teased several times, with all this great entertainment, I hope people don't forget that a great football game is going to break out in the middle of it, by the way.
I hope they do.
hip hop point of view, I remember you once said to Nas, you trying to keep knowledge. And since then, we've seen you change and evolve. And I think people forget about that to some extent. I remember the water initiative in Africa, Sean Bell, et cetera, et cetera. How do you address people who may have those short-term memory issues, or do you care?
I just got to do the work. That's the only thing that quiets that, like, because, we can go back and forth and have different perspectives of what we believe should happen, right? This should happen, or it should be like this, and this person should be involved. How could it go forward if this person isn't involved? All these different things that we can talk about and speak about, but no one can argue with the facts. No one can argue with the work. So I just got to do the work. And again, I'm familiar with this position. This is what I do.
Will this initiative create jobs or any other, we talk about inspiring the community, et cetera, but what about like jobs, things that people can really touch and feel?
I don't know.
So also, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Also in there, there's education and all these other things which will lead to job creation. And anybody that plugs in, say a song of the season, and that's your platform that you want to speak about. And it's not just our platform, we're plugging into anyone who wants to be involved. So say I'm Chance the Rapper and I feel like I want to create jobs in Chicago, we're going to support that initiative. Right. So it could be anything. It could be any initiative, anything, social injustice, anything that's happening in the country, we can plug into it. Okay. Yeah.
I think, I just add, I think it's going to be driven a lot by our players and the artists. We're going to continue to listen to them, see where we can have the greatest impact.
Jeff? Hi, Joe Reswack from Variety. Do you have a list yet of organizations that you're going to partner with that will benefit from this partnership? And also, Jay, do you regard this partnership as a form of protest? I mean, are you looking to change things from the inside?
Of course, yes. I'll answer that first. Because I don't have anything else to add to that. Just yes.
What's the question then for me?
The question was, do you have a list or have you set things up with nonprofit organizations?
Yes. We've already, as a matter of fact, not just a list, we've already started funding for the last 2 years, which we can give you an entire list of all the organizations that we have done with our players, with our clubs. And that funding began probably 18 months ago. Okay. And we have commitments to do that going in the future. And I think opportunity is something I'd say that's going to come out of this, where I think there'll be additional opportunities and frankly additional money that may come out of this that will go back into the communities because of this.
Okay, so there are no new partnerships as of yet as a result of this one?
We're not making that announcement today, no, but I have no question that that's going to evolve as we continue to talk with the artists and the players.
What he's saying, what was exciting for us as well is what we're saying is all those other initiatives Rock Nation drew up and these guys agreed to, which you have to give them credit for that. Inspired Change already existed. They already were donating money. I think it was 1.4 from the last event, but it was so, in my opinion, it was so spread out that it needed to be happening all year long, not just happening around a Super Bowl event. Couldn't be like one event a year. It had to happen all the time and throughout the whole year. It's, things are happening every day. Like we're creating philanthropy organizations for our players and realize, no, things are happening every day. We need a separate, which is Team Rock. This is Danya. I keep pointing to her because she runs it. No, we need something that happens every day because there's things happening all over this country and it's a lot of turmoil. And I think that we all have a responsibility to just push it forward. Like, it's good to have, like, you know, conversations about it. That's great. We have to bring awareness to it. So I'm not knocking the conversation. I actually welcome the conversation. I want to be held to a higher standard. I'm not even going to say higher standard. I want to be I want to be held accountable for what I'm doing, right? It keeps me sharp, Let me know that I can't play around. I have to do what I said I'm going to do. I'm self-motivated, so that's fine. You know, The extra pressure is fine too. What I'm saying is things are happening all the time, and we are going through a tough time. And the NFL platform for us, what was exciting for us, Inspire Change was already happening, and the NFL has a huge platform. And we can use that huge platform we've seen it happen. Like when J.J. Watts, came the aid to everybody in Houston, the whole world forgot about all the turmoil they had with the NFL. That's a great thing. That's a fantastic thing. And if you can use that platform to do that in different areas, then it's a home run. That's the success. I think someone asked me what I would view success. That's the success for me.
Thank you. Hi, Randy from AT. Asia's presentation mentioned that the Super Bowl performance will be picked based on the city and honoring the heritage of that. Can you elaborate on what that means exactly, and have conversations begun, like J-Lo, Enrique Iglesias, Pitbull?
No, not like that. Not in those terms. Like, typically when and we had this conversation, can't go to a city, plop a show down, and then leave. Like at least speak to the community, speak to the things, speak to the guys that's on the ground organizing things and trying to make things better in that sort of way. Because I don't, Tampa's next year. I love Tampa Bay. I don't have no idea who's from there, who performed. So you start running into that problem. If you start doing that, and sometimes it may happen and it may line up that the person is from the city that they perform, but you don't want to get into that space because then again, who performs in Tampa? Does anybody know?
Quick follow-up.
Tampa Bay. Class. There we go. Yes.
You mentioned that people forget the role that Adam Levine played in this. I was wondering if you could explain exactly what role did he play in all of this.
Well, we had to have the conversation, right? Because there was a lot of talk around Adam Levine's performance in Atlanta. So I think that and me being vocal about stepping back from performing as well, I think that sparked some of the conversation as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wonder, because you both talk about having these super candid conversations. I wonder if anything that, like asking this to Commissioner, anything that Jay offered to you that was surprising or enlightening in terms of his perspective of why he didn't perform or some of the protests that were going on?
Well, I think we probably keep some of that. He can speak for himself on some of that. I would tell you that in every conversation I've had with Jay has been enlightening. Not just on his perspective of the process of how we do the entertainment, but what we should try to achieve. Because we always say we can get better and we can evolve, and the Super Bowl halftime has over the years. We've always had those moments where we think we can say, let's think about doing this differently. And we always think we should partner with the best. That's why we're sitting here. We're partnering with the best. And so his perspective is going to drive us. I'm not going to sit here and talk to him about entertainers. He knows that business. What we have to do is figure out how do we support that and how do we make sure that we bring that to another level.
Your side?
Anything surprising, you
Yeah,
said?
just enlightening about his perspective. I just think
I think that the openness and willingness to, when we presented all these initiatives, we expected to maybe do one or two. We thought they would be super powerful as well as we could plug into Inspire Change. And these guys were just super open to, to allow their platform to be used to service others. That was a bit surprising.
good surprise.
Good surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Evans, I'm Gopinath with CNN. So, obviously, this is coming about in part as a response to protests on the field. And I just want to go back to the question the gentleman from Marketplace was asking earlier. What happens in the interim now? I mean, obviously, this is about, as you said, Jay, effective protest. But what happens the next time somebody protests on the field while this is still underway? Has there been any change in the way that the league is going to deal with that?
You said you're asking Jay?
You asking me?
No.
Commissioner, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I'm definitely not the commissioner yet.
See, that's what I was worried about.
I don't want that job.
That's what, you know, that's, to go back to, that's what we've been talking with our union about for the last year or so, and talking about, let's one, move forward and work progress, but two, let's do things together. Let's talk about when something needs to, when we need to shine a light on something, let's do it together. And that has been very effective for us. And that's what we talk about all the time, not just with the union, but also with our partners in the player coalition. And we have a group of owners and a group of players that work together, and they meet on a regular basis to talk about those things.
Quick follow-up, Jay. With the conversations you've had, the frankness and the seemingly open dialogue, sorry to put it this way, but would you kneel or would you stand?
Would I what?
Would you kneel or would you stand?
Okay, I think we've passed kneeling. Yeah, I think it's time to go into actionable items.
Do you want people to stop kneeling? Oh.
No, I don't want people to stop protesting at all. Kneeling, I know we're stuck on it because it's a real thing, but it's a form of protest. I support protests across the board. We need to bring light to the issue. I think everyone knows what the issue is, and we're done with that. Everyone knows what you know what the issue is? You know why we were kneeling? Okay, do you know the issue? Yeah, do you know the issue? Yes? We all know the issue now. Okay, next. Where are we moving on next? And I'm not, again, so to be clear for the room, I'm not minimizing that part of it because that has to happen. That's a necessary part of the process. But now we all know what's going on. What are we going to do? How are we going to stop? Because the kneeling was not about a job. It was about injustice. Let me bring attention to injustice. Everyone's saying, how are you going forward? And Cap doesn't have a job. This wasn't about him having a job. Right? That became part of it. That became part of the discussion. He was kneeling to bring attention to injustice. We know what it is. Now, how do we address that injustice? What's the way forward? Does anyone else anyone have any other suggestions of what's the way forward?
I agree with that. But Commissioner, can Cap get a job?
What?
Can Colin Kaepernick get a job? Is he being
Yeah, any team can sign him right now.
Thank you, Corey.
Hi, Corey from SN. I don't know if this is for Jay or for Asia, but who's the first subject for the Inspired Change documentary?
We don't have that first subject at this time.
I didn't hear Adrian.
Who the inspired
Yeah,
change?
who's the first subject of the Inspired Change documentary, which we don't have at this time.
Right. Uh-huh.
Hi, Danielle Dalton up with the Root.
We're taking suggestions as well.
So one of the initiatives that was highlighted in the reel was about police brutality, was about policing a community. So I'm wondering, when you kind of envision what an ideal program or initiative, or like what is that?
I get the easy job because I get to introduce the people who everybody here and everyone in the world knows. We got the founders of the largest foundation in the world and the two most important philanthropists in the world right now. $300 million towards vaccine treatments, more than $1 billion for production distribution, more than $1 billion to Gavi, with more to come. But Bill and Melinda Gates are putting tremendous amount of time, money. Going forward, have you had any thoughts about linking the Giving Pledge with the idea of Give While You Live and accelerated giving? Because I think, Melinda, it's spot on. You can't look at what's going on in the world now and think that your money's going to be better spent in 10 years. I mean, it feels like a now moment.
Yeah, I think one of the things we put more into is collaborative giving. The Giving Pledge itself doesn't give to any cause. It's not pulling money. But we feel a lot of the members go into things like Co-Impact, which is international in scope, Blue Meridian, which focuses on the U.S. and poverty, and see that they can learn and get leverage working together. Those charities are stepping up to say, okay, given the challenges of the epidemic or the the awareness of the inequities that are out there, how can they change their program? And so the expertise you get out of collaborative giving, we're really emphasizing that, particularly for people who get started out, and therefore to spend a higher percentage during their lifetime.
Yeah, and we're trying to role model that and do it ourselves. That's why we've stepped up with even more during this COVID time. We've also opened up a platform online called The Power Of, where people can go and look with finesse at places that need money in their community, whether that's around race or whether that's around poverty or COVID, or they can even say, I want to go give money in the community that I grew up in, and I want to give back there. How do I do that? So I think there are lots of ways that philanthropists can give right now. I think it's about all of us role modeling as a community.
I get the easy job because I get to introduce the people who everybody here and everyone in the world knows. We got the founders of the largest foundation in the world, and the two most important philanthropists in the world right now. $300 million towards vaccine treatments, more than $1 billion for production distribution, more than $1 billion to Gavi, with more to come. But Bill and Melinda Gates are putting tremendous amount of time, money, and brain power towards solving this scourge. We appreciate it. We appreciate you guys joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Please, and I love the couch. Before we get into, I really want to focus on this on COVID, but before that, Melinda, actually, you made some news this week with Mackenzie Bezos, your announcement about the Equality Can't Wait Challenge. You're putting $30 million into, basically to challenge ideas to move the needle to the gender equality. Can you maybe talk about the genesis of that and why you're doing this now?
Sure. I believe that we have to get gender equality here in the United States. It is imperative, and there are several barriers that hold women back. And we have to really, if we're going to bring women up, we have to invest in things to help them with their power and their influence. If we invest in 4 key sectors, such as politics, finance, tech, and media that tells our stories, and we started to get gender equality in those 4 segments of society, we would change society at large. And so Mackenzie and I have been talking about this actually for quite some time, and this happened to be the right time to make the announcement. But we're looking for bold new ideas of how do you actually move gender equality in the United States. And so we thought this platform, Lever for Change, was the perfect place to announce that. And we will start to see candidates come forward, and we'll make some prize-winning announcements hopefully next summer.
Okay, guys, we just had Dr. Stoffels talking about timelines. It's the biggest question in the world, and you guys are right at the center of it. When are we going to have, whether it's a therapeutic or a vaccine, but when is the world going to be able to get back to normal? You guys are running point on it. Help.
Well, hopefully one of the 3 vaccines that are furthest along end up being both safe and efficacious. The Moderna went into human trials first, then the Oxford AstraZeneca, and then the Johnson & Johnson that you just heard about from Paul Stoffels. And so the animal data gives us pretty good hope that one of those will work. Doesn't look like they'll work as a single-dose vaccine, probably a 2-dose vaccine. If those don't work, then there's about a 6-month gap before you get the other candidates coming forward. And so to have one in the first half of next year, it'll have to be those 3. And we are quite hopeful and working in parallel to get the manufacturing capacity, not just for rich countries, but for the developing countries, where actually right now the majority of the cases are not in the rich countries anymore. They're in South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, including India, sadly seeing a big increase.
Yep. So maybe you can delve into that, because there's so much public focus on, okay, we have the vaccine, but it's not even halfway there, because if we don't immunize, if we don't get herd immunity, or we don't get a large majority of the world immunized, then we really haven't beat this. So what's the timetable on that?
Well, if you say that you've got to get, say, 80% of the world's population with a 2-dose vaccine, that's over 10 billion doses. The 2 of the constructs, the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson, are pretty scalable in their manufacturing. That is, you can do single plants that turn out over 600 million doses per year. And so we're going around the world and saying, okay, where do we reserve? Where in the US, Europe, India, China, where do you get that capacity? Which, if both AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson work, you can actually see a plan that's starting to come together that we'd be able to make over a 2-year period pretty close to that many doses. But it won't be overnight, and so you'll have a 2-year period manufacturer if things go well. You will have to have some prioritization of who's at the front of that line and who's not at the front of that line.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important to say about these vaccines is the 2 that Bill's mentioning at the top of the list, the Oxford AstraZeneca one and the J&J, do not require cold chain. And that is huge for the world, whereas the Ebola vaccine and some of these other ones that are on the list do require very difficult cold chain, like minus 80 Celsius. And that is very difficult in many places in the world, not impossible. One of the reasons we're so involved in this is that you don't want the first vaccines to go to the high-spending countries. You need to make sure that there's equitable distribution. So if you just look at healthcare workers around the world, there's 60 million healthcare workers. They deserve to get the vaccine first. They're the ones dealing with this on the front lines, trying to keep us all safe. And then you have to start to tier from there based on the countries and the populations. But here in the United States, really, it's going to be Black people who really should get it first, and many indigenous people, as well as people with underlying symptoms, and then elderly people. They're the ones who all deserve to get that vaccine first.
Well, that makes sense. So how do we make that happen? Especially, how can philanthropy help, or is it only government policy? How do we get to that necessary place?
Yeah, we've had a lot of philanthropists come in on this in various ways, including what we call the Therapeutics Accelerator. Number of generous philanthropists have helped support that. Philanthropy can move a little bit quicker, support things that haven't gone through the same complex process. In the long run, the really big funding, as you're getting up into many billions, that will be governmental money. But the idea of getting the right scientists, the early candidates backed, getting the factories done in parallel, philanthropy will play a key role. We helped fund a trial in the UK that you just saw came out with a corticosteroid, dexamethasone, that showed really good results. And that trial network had been set up several years ago to be ready for an epidemic. That's not a complete solution. It's about a 20% reduction in the death rate, but it's a step. And there are other things, including monoclonal antibodies as therapeutics, that'll come out even before the vaccine is fully available.
And I think one thing for philanthropists to understand is we are lucky as a world that we have 2 institutions. We have this Gavi, which is the Vaccine Alliance that was created 20 years ago. That is the mechanism that the rich world governments, I know you're doing a panel on this, have been giving money to. And that's our pull mechanism to pull the vaccine through and get it out to countries. It's amazing how the pharmaceutical companies are working together in ways we never, ever in 20 years of doing this work have seen before. So we have that fund as a mechanism. Private philanthropy can come into that fund. It's really, really helpful. We put a lot of money into that fund. There's another fund, which is the Global Fund, which gives AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria medicines around the world. Again, that's been set up since the time of President Bush. And that fund is very good at getting medicines out. So they will be the ones to help us get a therapeutic medicine out all over the world equitably once one's available.
well, that's always key again for philanthropy not to be redundant either. So if we're talking about global fund, gotta be for distribution. Tell us about your work with production. You guys have put a lot into production and how that could be a model for other philanthropists in terms of trying to help in that middle ground. We have the vaccine, and then we have the distribution, and then the middle you have the production, and you're focusing on that too, and how philanthropy can play a role there.
Well, normally you get a medicine approved, and then you can start to build up the manufacturer. Here, because the impact on people's lives and the economy is measured in the trillions, the idea of putting forward at risk a small number of billions to shave a few months off of that availability, it makes sense. Now, exactly who should do that is tricky. And so we've been talking to other funders. Usually the United States plays a role in global problem solving. So rather than withdrawing from WHO, they'd be involved collaborating with other countries, not just trying to, cast blame. So it's a tricky situation where the U.S. has sort of turned inward on this one. There are some good things happening in the U.S. and so we're trying to stitch the different country efforts together. The European leaders are trying to fill that vacuum. So we don't yet have it all in place. If those 2 vaccines are successful, we can start to see how it could come together. But we also need to back a few other candidates in case there's some problem. We won't really know about side effects until we go through those large trials.
Well, also, this is a great example. I mean, philanthropy, and you two have been at the forefront of this, sometimes requires failure. And this is a case where we're going to go down roads that are expensive and necessary to get us to the other side. So I think that's a great point. Yeah, Bill, you mentioned, the U.S. Should we be, and we've got 189 philanthropists on this call right now, probably 2/3 Americans. Should we be optimistic? I mean, a lot of America's opening up, a lot of America's getting back to work, but then you look at Florida, Texas, Arizona. Should we be feeling good or not so good right now?
Well, sadly, the death rate is probably not going to go down much from where it is. Hot weather helps. And so as you get back into October, the force of infection will go back up again. The current death rate, which is still pretty serious, about 800 a day, that is benefiting from the seasonality. And, people are becoming more lax in general, both the policies and the behavior. And so it's hard to see, even though it'll get a little bit warmer here for a bit, the death rate's not going to go down much. And so Dr. Fauci's statement that, hey, we're still in this first wave, that will get more intense as we get into the fall, that's what everybody should assume. Until we have a miracle therapeutic, which the only one that has even a chance of that would be the monoclonal antibodies, or we've got the vaccine out, this thing will be stalking the land. And the U.S. has chosen not to be as strict as most of the Asian countries, particularly China, but also some of the others who started out early. They've gotten their number of infections down to very small numbers, whereas the U.S. still has a pretty gigantic number of infections.
Now, Melinda, I've heard you talk about disaggregating data. So tell us why that's important and how that can help bring solutions to the right population.
Yeah, so we have to have disaggregated data. Otherwise, we wouldn't know who's being disproportionately affected with this virus. And it helps us understand where to apply resources. And so we are just in the process with our many disease modeling organizations that we work with, trying to get that data from the states. Not all states have it and have it in a way that we can use it. But if we can use that data, then we know to say, okay, this is where we need to make sure we apply the resources. And quite honestly, apply the vaccine first. The testing, the therapeutic when it becomes available, and the vaccine. Those are going to be the hot spots and where you're going to want to go to help affect the most change for this country. And I have to say, it is why you've seen Bill and I be a bit critical of the current U.S. government, just because if we were doing testing today, our only tools today are social distancing, masks, and testing. And so if we had been doing testing in the right national way, we could be more in the shape that Germany's in, where you test and you do contact tracing. That is going to be really, really important and continue to be important through the fall when we see this next big wave of this epidemic coming through.
So what we've heard from you guys is that the second wave is a when, not an if. And with that in mind, all right, so President Trump, finds religion, calls you guys and says, what should we do? What is the game plan? If you had to give us an elevator pitch that we can this group can spread to the world here in the States about what a more effective policy would be.
Well, just usage of masks alone makes a substantial difference. And the compliance to mask usage in South Korea, China, Japan, it's very impressive. In the U.S., partly because of the lack of leadership examples, our mask compliance is actually not very good. A mask is not that expensive. It's not that ugly. And so when you're in those situations where you're near to people, it should be used. We're learning more and more about testing capacity is going up if we can get it some breakthroughs on testing scale and target it appropriately, particularly anyone who has contact with older people or those at a greater risk. It will help us bring the numbers down. But and we don't know, are we going back to say 2,000 deaths a day like we were in April? That's hard to say. It's possible that we will. So 2020 is going to be a very tough year because the U.S. just hasn't been willing to drive the numbers to the same low level that many other countries did.
Yeah, so the elevator pitch is test, contact trace, isolate and quarantine, and wear a mask, and role model wearing a mask. Every single person should be wearing a mask, without exception.
We spent the first half of this session talking about equity and opportunity. Let's talk about that in the context of COVID and how this, how this affects us again around the world, especially here in the States, based on race and gender. There are differentiations, and maybe you could handle race and one of the gender, but maybe you could delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, it's certainly troubling that where the disaggregated data has come through, it does show not only the age thing, which is number one, and the comorbidities at number two, but also a significant racial component. And that's likely to be multifactorial, partly general health condition to begin with, partly job type, household size, multi-generational household, living in the dense parts of the urban areas. And we're also looking at all sorts of medical things. What is it that we can intervene to cut this down? So if in advance, if you'd asked, would there be different outcomes by race, we would not have expected that. It's a stunning and disappointing result that we're seeing in many countries. The UK has seen this as well. For a while, the disease did not take off in Africa. Sadly, it looks like that was just a delay in it getting going because now, despite the younger age mix, the cases in South Africa and other parts of Africa are taking off, even somewhat behind Asia and South America, but still with a very, very scary trend. So there's a lot to be done on the intervention side to reduce that exposure, to prioritize the protection that the inner city communities deserve on this.
Yes, and I'm just going to add on the race. I think also it's exposed for us the gaps in our healthcare system. You are not treated equally in the healthcare system, and that is something that needs to be fixed. On the gender side, I think again it's exposing the gaps that were already there that we so often as Americans don't want to look at. So just to give you some statistics, women are losing their jobs at a disproportionate rate to men. A lot of it has to do with the sectors that women work in, like retail and hospitality. But even as people start to go back to work, fewer women are coming back to the workforce as a percentage compared to men. So those are the statistics for the United States. Now, the other issue that's going on is we know women are doing 2.5 more times unpaid labor at home, and they and their husbands are reporting that when it comes to teaching the kids, trying to make sure they're online, fixing the meals, cleaning up, babysitting the kids, caring for the elderly, women are doing that more at home, whether you're a white collar female worker or whether you're a person who lives in the inner city and you get on the bus to go to your job. And so what it means is that we cannot reopen this economy the way we want to unless we deal with the unpaid labor. And we are the only industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have a paid family medical leave policy. That's just the truth. And so we have it now in 8 states and in DC. We finally have it for federal military workers. And you saw Congress address this in 2 of the stimulus packages. But we have to update our thinking and realize that we're not in society anymore where the man, if it's a 2-person headed household that's married with a child, it's not that the man goes off to work and the woman stays home with the children. That was what was going on at the mid-century. But today, of most married families with a child, 64% of them both go out and work. So if we're going to take care of the family and take care of capitalism and the economy, you've got to address that issue. And it is absolutely addressable. Many, many countries have done it with finesse. There are many great policies out there. In the United States, it's time we did it.
We say, many people taking credit for the saying, never let a good crisis go to waste, and I think you are seeing movement in terms of public opinion on that. Speaking of public opinion, let's talk about public trust. We seem to be in a strange kind of post-science moment where all this amazing work, as Steve Ford and Mike Milton were talking about warp speed to get to a vaccine, but a vaccine is only so useful if people don't take it or don't trust it. What do we do about that?
Well, there's certainly a lot of misinformation. It's great people are paying attention to vaccines in a way, but a lot of that's the false data. We'll see as the vaccine comes out. We don't need absolutely everyone to take it, but we need a pretty high percentage to take it to get the protection that eventually brings this epidemic to an end. And then things like going to a big stadium will be reasonable to do again, which we shouldn't be doing that right now. So the digital era has brought a lot of misinformation, and with the pandemic, vaccines in particular, I hope that's not getting out to the mainstream.
It's interesting. We have such a short memory as a country, but look, we lived through something scary like this. It was called polio. And it affected so many families in the United States where they were terrified, for good reason, to let their children go out and play because we, at the time, didn't know where polio came from. And then we had to wait for this Salk and Sabin vaccine. Once those vaccines came out, people lined up in droves for those vaccines. So my hope is that this time will eventually remind people the importance of public health. We forget in this country that diseases like measles are way more infectious than COVID-19 is. I mean, for every person who gets measles, they tend to infect 8 to 9 other people. It is so infectious. We can have another one of those come along. So I'm hopeful that, as the vaccine comes and people do start to use it, it will quell down some of these kind of silly conspiracy theories that are out there.
Well, speaking of conspiracy theories, how are you guys doing personally? You're both the subject of a lot of these conspiracy theories. You're doing amazing work and putting a lot of time and money and effort into it, and then this is to some degree what you get. How is that personally affecting you both?
Well, the disinformation is it's confounding on the one hand. And on the other hand, we're still just putting our heads down and doing the work. It doesn't change our daily life to have those conspiracy theories out there. We know they're not true. They certainly come up a little bit with the kids in the household. By the way, we do have our son came home early from college, unfortunately for him. So that conversation comes up, but it doesn't change what we do on a day-to-day basis, luckily.
A little bit amused.
Well, I hope it remains a humorous thing, that there aren't anything more that comes of that. It's not like we're going to back off or anything. Some news channels have been better than others on these things. And, it just shows there's certain primal concerns about, medicine and science and experts that when people are worried, they're kind of more open-minded to unusual explanations.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of anxiety for good reason in the country right now and a lot of tension. And people are more glued at home. They have more time. So in some ways, maybe this was inevitable. But I know my husband is not vaccinating people and putting a microchip in our arm because that technology doesn't even exist and he's never uttered the words out of his mouth. So
speaking, of other tricky issues right now, you guys mentioned WHO. Clearly the world has never needed that organization more, and yet, it's become a political lightning rod. Listen, there are things, a lot of things, a lot of problems there too. So what can we do to forge a consensus in this country, here in the States? I'm sure you've got a lot of people in the world that kind of shaking their head a little bit, but how can we forge a consensus to not make this a controversial issue?
Yeah, so one thing I want to say even before you answer the question is we thought long and hard about whether to speak out in favor of WHO, and we knew we were going to come under attack, but it was the right thing to do. We know this institution. We've worked with this institution now for 20 years. It is not perfect. It's not even close to perfect, but it is what the world set up after World War II to deal with things like this pandemic. And so it is caught now between the tensions between the United States and China, those geopolitics. But we felt as philanthropists, it was incredibly important to put our voices behind a partner we know to be true but imperfect. So that is why we spoke out. As to what others can do, I don't know. Do you want to take that?
Well, at some point there needs to be a responsible plan for how the U.S. cooperates with other countries about health things. WHO is involved in smallpox eradication, and U.S. Our relationship with WHO is key there. Polio, we are close. We're down to just a few countries. That's very much WHO, where both our money, U.S. money, other countries get to that. And so, you hope that in terms of protecting people's lives, there eventually is a serious discussion about how the world works together. Even this issue of getting the vaccine out, we're hoping the U.S. in the same way it did step up for smallpox, malaria, and polio, that it steps up. Like an HIV, that the U.S. does step up. And so the Congress seems very interested in the U.S. not being so weak that it's other countries that figure out these global problems. It creates a vacuum. It erodes the kind of relationship and admiration and self-confidence people have had in us as a country. And so I just say rationality will reappear from someone at some point, and the U.S. will get engaged in its generosity and the world body that is charged with pandemic coordination.
Yeah, I think one thing it's important for the philanthropists on the phone to also know is just that WHO, as Bill said, is on the front lines of eradicating polio. Well, that's important for polio, but why else is it important? Well, when Ebola broke out in East Africa and it made it to Lagos, as we know, one of the most populous cities in the world, and Ebola came to Lagos, immediately those polio resources that WHO had, we had funded, Rotary had funded, immediately those resources got flipped, and that polio clinic got flipped to be an emergency response clinic. And they immediately went out and did all the contact tracing and quarantining. If that hadn't happened, we would have seen so much Ebola be flown to New York and San Francisco and spread all over the United States. So the world got lucky on Ebola. There are other hemorrhagic fevers out there. And so if we don't have a functioning WHO, you're not going to see an immediate response like that.
Yeah, I think if anything comes out of COVID right now, it's that we are strengthening. There will be a stronger global healthcare system emerging from this. And again, you guys have been talking about this for years, and unfortunately, it's come true. Tell us about. I know our knowledge partner is the Global Citizen on this event, and you're working with the Global Citizen, the European Commission, Bloomberg Philanthropies, the Global Goal Unite for Future campaign, the Giving Summit coming up. Tell us about that, how that plays in everything you're talking about right now.
Well, sadly, the pain of this epidemic, although it's gigantic in the rich countries, including the United States, and it's gigantic in a way that's very inequitable. Inner city students, racial minorities, poor households. It's even more challenging as you get to the developing countries where their health system is not as strong, their ability to isolate because they have to go out and get food on a daily basis. It's going to be very tough. And so the question, do we pull together as a world to get the tools out to everyone to help them recover from what's happened here? Global Citizen is a great organization that's got artists to come in to express their values about these things, to give a platform to the government leaders who want to talk about their commitments to help out with these things. So, Global Citizen's been absolutely fantastic, and they've stepped up. Here in June, they're going to have a big event.
Well, speaking of big events and big anniversaries, we're running short on time, but right now we're hitting the 10th anniversary of the Giving Pledge, and we have 2/3 of the founders here. Tell us on this. Again, there's a lot going on in the world, but I don't want to miss this opportunity to ask kind of your reflections 10 years in terms of how satisfied you are and where you see us going forward with this.
Yeah, I think both Bill and I and Warren, Bill spoke with Warren yesterday. We couldn't be more pleased about where the Giving Pledge is today. We would not have imagined 10 years ago that we'd have this many pledgers from this many different countries around the world.
And I think
I'm sorry?
What number are we up to?
I think we're up to 169 pledgers from 28 different places. Is that right?
Yeah, maybe slightly more.
Yeah, slightly more than that. So many of whom are on the phone, including like Stride Misiawa from Africa, and Sarah Blakely, I know you had on. I think the other surprise to us has been the learning that we've done as a community. Like there are some pledgers I know for Bill and I, but I just don't think we ever would have met who are doing unbelievable work, say on prison reform, with finesse, and we're learning what they're
to address that, and we need to deal with it. And we earned citizenship.
Yeah.
Which was a wonderful
Earned citizenship.
Right? That what we need to do is pass comprehensive immigration reform, and let's think of it as earned citizenship. Let people earn their citizenship, but don't deny them citizenship. What I have seen is a number of things, but I will tell you that what I think is going to be a chasm that we need to fill and deal with. I'm now in the United States Senate. I'm a proud daughter of California. We have an outsized stake in the outcome of this conversation. We have more immigrants, documented and undocumented, than any state in the country. 1 out of 2 Californians was born outside of the United States or has a parent who was born outside of the United States, myself included. We have a huge stake in the outcome of this conversation. We are the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world. We have almost 39 million people. We have a huge stake in the outcome of this conversation. I now serve in the United States Senate, and I'm working side by side with people from all over the country. And one of the things I've realized is that there are a lot of people who are the legislators who will make the decision at the federal level about immigration who do not have any experience with this population, and they also seem, some to maybe have just forgotten the history of our country, which is that we are a land of immigrants. But in a light most favorable to them, and understanding what we need to deal with, I also have a lot of colleagues who are well-intentioned but just don't know who this population is. They've not attended a college track graduation. They have not seen these kids that Laureen is talking about, the dreamers. These people who as toddlers were brought into our country, who, as she said, only know our country as their home. Dreamers who are, the vast majority of them, in college or serving in our military or working in Fortune 100 companies. Some number, like almost half of the thriving businesses in California were started by an immigrant or the child of an immigrant, right? And what I'm realizing is so many of the people who actually could be leaders in getting us to the point that we pass comprehensive immigration reform, they just don't know this population. And I'll tell you how I figured that out. There was one moment, but many things that led up to it. But this one moment, So I serve on many committees, Budget Committee, I am on the Senate Intelligence Committee, who would have known, the hottest committee in town. I'm on, yes, the Homeland Security Committee, and I'm on Environment and Public Works. So Homeland Security. So the Senate has a responsibility to confirm, if we believe it's appropriate, the appointments that the president makes to, as it turns out, his cabinet. And so in the context of Homeland Security, I then reviewed the president's nominee at the time, General John Kelly. And there were a number of questions that were being asked of him during the confirmation hearing. And when it came to me, I asked him about DACA. And DACA, acronym DACA, basically deferred action for these kids. Deferred action meaning deferred deportation of these children and young people. And I asked him, is he familiar with this population? And you know that the president, former president, issued this executive order that said we will defer action on their deportation if they meet certain criteria. And I asked him, and you know that these questions included, the circumstances under which they were brought to the country. Are they living a lawful life? What are they doing? Have they committed any crimes? Are they being productive? Are they contributing? And if they passed a very comprehensive examination of who they are, they then qualified for DACA. So my question in the committee hearing was, General Kelly, will you agree to keep America's promise to these kids? When we said, and I have the government form where we said it, that if you, young person, give us this information about who you are, we will not share that information with ICE, which is the branch of the Department of Homeland Security that deports. I asked him if he would commit. He would not commit.
So they want to use it for that. So
I then asked him in another process called, I know all these acronyms. I know a process called a QFR, those questions for the record. And I asked him then in a formal way, will you keep America's promise to these kids? I will not commit. I will follow the law, the policy priorities on immigration of the president.
All right. So,
but here's what I'd like to share with you. In between those two, the committee hearing and me submitting these questions for the record, I asked for a meeting with him where he and I could just meet and talk. And during the course of our conversation, when again I asked him, will you keep our promise to these dreamers, to these kids? I could tell that there was a gap in terms of just body language. We weren't communicating. And so I asked him, General Kelly, have you ever met a dreamer? And he said, no. And then, then it kind of went downhill because I said, well, I would love to set up a meeting for you with them because you have to know who they are and meet them so you can see what we're talking about. And he said, well, will you instead, how about if I meet with their representative? That was a low moment. But what became clear to me then and through conversations that I've had is that we need to actually create more opportunities for policymakers and opinion leaders
to meet
them and to meet, and also around H-1B visas. Same thing. They don't know the population we're talking about. They don't know this population as their neighbors, as their friends, as young people that they're invested in and who are contributing.
So, Lorraine, you went to the White House to talk about this, correct? I mean, can you tell the story what you did? You went to see President Trump.
I did.
On this issue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it was set up for the president by someone that we both know who wanted to make sure that he had a conversation with somebody outside of the White House about it. And honestly, he was engaged in our meeting, and he asked
You were surprised.
I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect. This was after the executive orders around the Muslim ban, and I felt like
you wanted to
I would absolutely do whatever it takes if I can be helpful to students and families who I think are extraordinary and who are on the wrong side of a bad law, which is all these students. So I went there. And honestly, we've been doing national polling and focus group testing and with Republican pollsters for years in Republican districts, in House districts. We have a supermajority of Americans who support earned citizenship, who support a pathway to legalization and citizenship for undocumented immigrants. So I brought that information to the president. He asked some questions, and then he talked about having a huge heart for Dreamers, and he said, I don't want to deport the Dreamers. And I said, that's really good. It would be really good for you to say that publicly as well, so that other people can understand what your legislative priorities are. So he said, you know, we want to pass immigration reform, and he said, speaking of himself, I think I'm the only one who can do that. And I said, certainly as a Republican president with 2 houses of Congress, you absolutely could do this. So let's see it done in a humane and viable and thoughtful way. And so we gave them lots of follow-up information. So we'll see what ends up happening.
How do you feel? What's going to happen in this, both of you? Where is immigration, just not including the Muslim ban, which is
well, I'll tell you something. We still do work with thousands of families who are living in abject fear right now. We have a huge increase in arrests across the country. There are families who are now pulling their kids out of school because they're really afraid of them leaving the house. There are families where the parents take turn leaving so that if one of them gets arrested and deported, the children aren't parentless. There's a lot of discord in communities where we work. So it's bad. It's a bad situation. We need a legislative fix for this. Or we need some signal that we understand the economic engine that immigrants are. We understand that we live in a society where we are living off the labor of individuals who are living in the shadows, and that's not acceptable.
From all levels. And so what do you see happening? Does it have to be a court thing, or do you feel like?
You raise a wonderful point. So first of all, it is a shame that this president, I think that many reasonable people would agree, that his campaign caught fire when he talked about building a wall. First of all, Mexico's not paying for the wall. So let's all be clear about that.
And when he demonized Mexicans and called them rapists
but
and
that's
murderers.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It led up to that.
Yep.
But
also we have so many immigrants in our country who he was demonizing and
right. Well, he wants to build a wall around them. But go ahead.
Well, and that's exactly right. And so he built up a reputation, and he made certain promises to the people who supported him, that this is his perspective on this huge population of people, that there should be a wall that guards us from them, that we are, that he's creating a deportation force. It is the policy of this administration to hire as many as 15,000 new agents in the Department of Homeland Security. And there is a Muslim ban, which courts have found to be unconstitutional. And so, to your point, where is the relief? Where is it going to come from? I'll say this. I think that what we are seeing is a situation where, our democracy in many ways is being challenged, if you will. Our republic is being challenged. The way I think of it is this. Our republic, our democracy, I think stands on certain pillars. And if you want to think of it as a table with the legs, there are the 3 independent co-equal branches of government. So there's the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And then the 4th is a free and independent press. And systematically, there have been charges, and I think an attempt to dismantle these pillars upon which we stand. And thankfully, what is happening is it is proving the founders of our country right with the beautiful design we created with these 3 co-equal branches and a free and independent press, that it is those pillars, that are holding the executive accountable. Even when you are called the lying press, even when we talk about so-called judges, even when there are attempts to discredit the legislative
Where
branch.
do you imagine, what are you doing right now to stop that? Like, from a legislative, what are you at the Emerson Collective doing? And then I want to get on to healthcare and also retraining people, because that's part of it, is that this is part of, like, the HB1Vs people, the immigrants that are getting kicked out, they're all part of the same continuum of what we do.
I think that you are right to connect these points, because part of what we are also seeing is, it's a false choice, by the way, that the American people and the American public is being offered, which is, the inference is those people are taking your jobs. So we're going to build a wall and, and cut off H-1B visas, and because those people have taken your jobs, which by virtue of sealing them off, we're now going to give back to you. It's a false choice, and it's wrong, and it's incorrect. But certainly, if we're going to talk about how we fix this, and I think this is where you're going, we need to have a better plan for America's workforce that transitions them into the 21st economy, and that's where our great folks in California, she says with bravado, and around the country who are involved in tech and other renewable energy and other workforce issues as it relates to the 21st century are going to kick in.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, but it's also true that a lot of the response and the phenomenon of the 2016 election wasn't economically motivated, it was culturally motivated. And there are good pieces about that, a good analysis that's been written, that people feel like they don't recognize their country. And so there's a lot to unpack there.
Which
also
doing,
what people
which
don't
you've been
know.
doing going around the country with photographs. Explain, for example, your project.
That's
this
something
is kind of a fascinating way
But
to
something that I'm not sure people in the audience know, which is important to know, is that we've actually had a net outflow of people on our southern border since 2014.
That's right.
And it's a small detail, it's an asterisk that most people don't speak about. So it just adds to the ridiculousness of the wall. But some of the things that we've been doing, certainly in this year, we can't push for a legislative redress, but what we can do is contribute to organizations that are strengthening representation for immigrants. So we work in the field with many legal aid clinics. There are great organizations like NILC and ACLU that are obviously bringing good litigation. There's really good impact litigation that's happening across the country. So using the judiciary to challenge unfair practices, certainly. But we can also use artists and art to raise awareness. And so something that you're referring to, we commissioned a film with Davis Guggenheim to talk about dreamers and follow dreamers and their families, so that people could, even if they don't have proximity, they could get an understanding of it. We also worked with the artist JR, and we went across the country to 20 cities and did what's called Inside Out 11 million. And people came and took these full-scale portraits and hung them on public buildings.
Where did you, some of them were very funny where you hung them. Where did you were somewhat what you did. Where did
certainly up the Freedom Tower in Miami, off the Selma Bridge, in Boehner's district, in Cantor's district. We had lots and lots of districts that were covered. We did ask permission usually if we could put them up on walls. Otherwise, we had people put them on sticks and stand out.
I want to get to your involvement in the media in a minute, but I want to talk first about job training, because that's another thing you're doing, job training and education, which is something that you're pushing, and then also at what you're doing. Talk a little bit about that concept, because a lot of people are worried about, you represent the state that is bringing us robotics, automation, AI, and possibly the end of all jobs. I'm not gonna, you know what I mean? Like, you hear that, and that's probably one end of it, and then you have the tech companies saying it's all gonna be great because you just think of something and Amazon will deliver your fidget spinner without even knowing that you want it, kind of thing.
Right.
How do you bridge that gap? Because you want to get people trained in the jobs. How do you look at that? And do you think legislators really understand where the population's going in terms of workforce?
So Part of the issue is that I think that a lot of, sociologists are talking about there's a divide in our country that is really, there's part of it that we can attribute to the rapid growth of technology, and the ubiquitous nature of it. So sociologists are talking about, during the course of human evolution, at the point that a new language is born, it's a very pivotal moment in time. And as we know, new languages have been born. This is not Pig Latin. People are emoting differently, they're thinking differently, they're feeling differently. Sociologists have talked about how we have never seen the kind of generational divide that we now see between parent and child. It was always around music or clothing, but the divide between parents and children right now because of technology is pretty substantial. So people are feeling displaced in their lives, even if they have a job and they can keep that job and they feel good about it. But when you then layer upon that the fact that technology has upended long-standing business models, there is a healthy number of people in our country who are feeling displaced rightly, who wonder if they are relevant, who wonder if their skills are obsolete. And I think we need to address that, and we need to deal with it. And we have to do it in a way that, one, is about truth-telling. I think that's part of what we're missing right now in this country. We need to speak truth to people. And, there is something that is also happening, which is that people are feeling a sense of distrust, of authority, of institutions, of their government. And as we know in our personal relationships, a relationship of trust is the foundation of it is truth. Truth is something also we know in our personal and professional relationships. To speak truth makes people uncomfortable.
Right, but what's the truth?
And so
then?
leaders don't like to make people uncomfortable if they're up for election, and so they don't often speak truth in a way that will make their audience feel uncomfortable.
So what's the truth?
So the truth is that we are a changing society. The truth is that at some point we're going to look at a situation where driverless cars are going to be. Where the jobs that employed large numbers of people around driving something on wheels will not exist, be it a truck, be it a UPS driver, a postal worker, a cab driver. We have to speak truth about that. We have to speak truth about the fact that we are automating certain industries, including coal mining. Now, and so we can talk about coal mining, and people think that, the conversation is, do you care what kind of energy are we talking about, and are we talking about the environment and greenhouse gas emissions? No, it's just actually we're going to automate that even if we keep the coal mines open. We need to speak truth. We have to speak truth, and then we have to understand that once truth has been spoken and acknowledged, we have to transition people into the workforce. And part of that is going to be to retrain the workforce. And part of my obsession right now is what we need to do around retraining, that group of people who are between about 30 and 50, who once had a job, who are unemployed, and who want to work. And we're going to have to, I think, rely on our community college structure. We're going to have to learn to also transition them into renewable energies and teach them about adoption of technology. And Kara, I think one of the pieces that's really critical about that is also understanding that for a lot of the folks who want the jobs that need to be filled, they need to be trained in a way that their priority is not to go through that education process to get a cap and a gown. They want to go through that education process to get the certificate that is necessary for them to take the job.
So, Lorraine, when
critical.
you're thinking about that, because it's one area you're thinking about is how you're going to get that, whose responsibility is it? I mean, you've been involved in the tech sector, and this is
And whose responsibility is it for workforce development and workforce transition? Well, it's all of our responsibilities. But certainly, if we care about solving one of the great problems of our generation collectively, then that's one of the ones that we all have to come together to solve. Because if the numbers are to be believed, we have 3 million jobs that will go away within whatever X number of years, 5 to 10 years, and most of those people will need some other form of productive work. So there are really, people are starting to think about this. There are really interesting platforms that are starting to develop in the state of Delaware, in the state of Colorado. There are lots of assets that are lying vacant in communities across America that can be repurposed as maker spaces and as incubators and as job training spaces. There are people like Steve Case, who's here, who's going, who's talking about innovation that happens in unlikely places and building out those ecosystems.
So you're someone who has the Emerson Collective. You've got an awful lot of money. What do you think your response? Because one thing that you're doing is very quietly investing. Would you think you're a philanthropy? Are you a venture capitalist? Well, how do you look at your role?
At what we do?
Yeah.
And what I do, I'd say I'm agnostic as to the form that capital takes. I'm not personally interested in wealth creation. I'm interested in deploying capital in the most effective way to create the greatest good that we can. And so if it's through philanthropy, we build out an ecosystem through philanthropy.
Say college track, something like that.
For example.
Right.
Yeah, but we have a pretty robust portfolio in education and in immigration and in the environment. People who we think are extraordinary social entrepreneurs.
Give me an example in education, what you're doing there.
Other than college track?
Yeah.
There are plenty of them. We also do our own direct action. So one of the examples is XQ Institute, which we fund, that we incubated within Emerson Collective, where we issued a national challenge to redesign high schools. And 2 years ago, we issued this challenge, and we designed a competition that said, if you follow this, center your redesign on student voice, truly listen to students, map the demands of the workforce onto your design, so the outcomes that your students have map onto the demands of the workforce. If you learn about neuroscience and understand that neuroplasticity happens at extraordinary rates during the teenage years, just like it does in early childhood, all of these interesting modules that we put together, the teams came together, went through these modules, and came up with a brand new design for high schools in their communities that leapfrog the old design of high schools, which haven't changed fundamentally in 120 years. Mainly because they were based on a time-based system, and we used time as a proxy for learning, and now we can use content mastery and use time as a variable. At any rate, we had, after all these, we had 43,000 people engage in the competition. We had 700 full-fledged applications from every country, every state in the country, and we ended up naming 10 super schools. And so this remains one of our initiatives. We're working with these schools. We have, we've developed out new standards and evaluation and teacher training programs, and so that's the kind of thing that we do ourselves.
I'm going to get to whether you're going to be president or not in a second, but or you're running for president or not in 2020. But you also are investing in media. You're not Jeff Bezos, but you've been pretty quietly investing in.
Well, you can't invest quietly in media.
No, that's true.
You actually, that's why you know about it.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're all gossips.
No, but you actually have to be public about it.
Yeah. So tell you have investments in California Sunday. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Where else? Where else have you?
Anonymous Content, Macro Media, which is a new studio, and Ozzy.
Ozzy?
Yes.
So why are you doing that?
Because it was pretty obvious to me that we could build, we build out in a very cross-disciplinary way our work in capital investing and policy and philanthropy, and we could do this work forever and ever, and we could have the narrative overtaken by by someone who has a lot of power, who's completely contrary to us, and we could never get to the place where we think we're part of a more just and equal society. And so it was obvious that if we could be part of the creation of cultural narrative, that would enhance and amplify all the work that we're doing.
Which is Hillary Clinton talked about today, is telling the story, getting the content out there.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So these are early days for us, but that's the idea behind it. We want to inspire the kind of stories that we'd like to see told.
Do you ever see you buying something bigger, like the New York Times, for example?
Is it for sale?
It could be for you. You could afford it.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people could afford it. I didn't know it was for sale.
No, but I'm just saying, would that be something? Would that be something I could broker for you? No, no.
Honestly,
he asked for a check. He did. Dean Paquette.
I heard you talking about the VIG earlier.
The big check. The big
I know
check.
it's on your mind.
I know, but he did talk about getting a big check. He would take a big check. Yes, I would.
Oh,
Someone
he did?
Yeah, a big check from someone who's nonpartisan who wants to help media. That reads like you to me, but
well,
okay.
I do think it's a national treasure that should be preserved.
But do you think that way about media or not?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we think in big ways. We also are supporters of nonprofit media, like ProPublica and Cal Matters and Grist and Chalkbeat, and the Center for Investigative Reporting. There's some amazing media companies that are also in the nonprofit sector, so we're happy about that. StoryCorps, I think, is one of the great nonprofit media properties.
Absolutely. Now, Senator Harris, we have just a little more time, then we're going to get some questions. What's it like in Washington right now? What is the mood? I mean, obviously, healthcare is a big issue right now in the Senate. What's it like being there right now? How do you feel?
Yeah. You know, one of the things that captures it is, so my husband and I, we have she just turned 18 this weekend, 18-year-old, graduating high school. And she asked me to come and speak to her class. And I did, and one of these smart seniors asked me, what are we going to do about a divided America? And I looked at her and I thought for a moment, and I said, I actually reject the premise. I don't believe we are a divided America. And I'll tell you why. When the vast majority of people wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with that thought that is rattling us, with that thing that is worrying us, when we wake up at a cold sweat, worrying about that thing at 3 o'clock in the morning, we are never thinking about that thing through the lens of being a Democrat or a Republican. And for the vast majority of people, when we are thinking that thought at 3 o'clock in the morning, it usually has to do with one of just a very few things. Our personal health, the health of our children, the health of our parents. Can we get a job? Can we keep a job? Can we pay the bills by the end of the month? Can we retire with dignity? For the vast majority of people.
Yeah, also House of Cards, how upsetting it is, but go ahead.
But you know, and that if you have the time to watch and you can actually afford cable.
Okay, fine.
Right? No, really.
Okay. I know, you're a U.S. Senator, you're super busy.
So the point is that the vast majority of people have so much more in common than what separates us. And, you know, so let's just think of it in the context of universal values and universal truths. And I think that what has happened in Washington, D.C. over the years is we have accepted this premise that is a false premise, that we are a divided country. And the only way that I think we're going to come out of this is to acknowledge that there are these universal truths, and to acknowledge that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And we can just go back to one of the first questions you asked. The parents of those dreamers have the same dreams for those children, those kids, that any other parent has. And we've got to get away from seeing so many issues that are core issues, that are fundamental issues, through the lens of party affiliation or ideology, when in fact there are just some issues that are not even bipartisan, they're nonpartisan. The problem with Washington, I think, is that some people have been, you know, we have as a country perhaps accepted a false premise, which is that there are partisan issues and there are Democrats' priorities and Republicans' priorities instead of core priorities. And I will tell you, in my relationships and interactions, and I'm making a very very serious and I think productive effort to work across the aisle on just that point. When I'm sitting down with someone who is, Lindsey Graham.
He's a funny guy.
He's a great guy. Who, ostensibly, what would I have in common with him? What would he have in common with me? We get on so well and agree on so many points. And so I'm optimistic. I'm a realist, but I'm optimistic that the cliche about Washington, D.C. is actually something that we can get beyond, but it's going to take a lot of work.
The thing is, I get your emails, and they're pretty mad. I get Kamala Harris emails all the time, and they're like, we got to win back the House. We got to win this back, and Clinton, the Secretary.
Yeah, well, we do when you have a House of Representatives that is trying to kill the Affordable Care Act, which is going to result in 23 million people losing health care, and when they're trying to get rid of Planned Parenthood for political and ideological reasons, when every day that Planned Parenthood stays in force, 8,100 people every day go there, and the vast majority of them are not there for abortion. In fact, only like but for family planning.
And family.
And so yes, I get upset about that. Yes, I get upset when someone says that it's okay to ban people coming from countries based on the God they worship. Yes, I get upset when we say we're going to shut our door to refugees who are fleeing such atrocities and have been standing in line for 2 years to qualify for refugee status, and they arrive here and we turn them away. Yes, I'm going to get mad about that. Yes, I'm going to get mad when we have I'm going to get mad when we have an attorney general who is trying to resuscitate the war on drugs.
Yes, can we talk
And he thinks the greatest evil that mankind has ever seen is marijuana.
It's great.
Like, I've said this, and you've seen this in my emails. Yeah. Leave grandma's medical marijuana alone. Just leave it alone.
So what are you going to do about that? How are you going to, what did the Democrats do?
I think one thing is we just have to speak truth. We have to be active. Some people say to me, a lot of people ask me, Kamala, what can I do? What can we do? Does it matter? And it does matter. The reason the Affordable Care Act, the first time they tried to get it out of the House, it failed, was because people were speaking up and saying, don't play politics with public health. Same in terms of what's happening around, what we're doing around immigration, what we're doing, the people speaking up. And so even though they've not committed to keeping DACA in place, they've not done away with it yet. We have to stay active. And, we have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke. And you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke. Yeah. And know that and we all have to know our voice matters. And so, it's not just whistling in the wind. It does matter. And maybe the one of the many silver linings, whatever you believe, whoever you support, it's good for our democracy when people feel engaged and they feel passionate. However you feel, again, whoever you vote for, that's good for us, especially when we came out of an election cycle where, we have a foreign government who, by all accounts, interfered with the election of President of the United States. These are serious times. And these are not issues that, we can just sit around with a glass of Chardonnay debating, and philosophizing about. The decisions that are being made right now are impacting real human beings. Lorraine talked about it. There are children who are not being sent to school because their parents are worried that those children come in contact with authorities who will deport the parent. The police chief of Los Angeles, one of the largest police departments in the country, will tell you how there has been an exponential decline in people among immigrants reporting crimes against them.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about a rape victim. I'm talking about a victim of domestic violence, of child sexual assault, who is not reporting a crime against them because, let me tell you, and I know this from prosecuting cases, that victim of domestic violence, let me tell you, the one instinct that a woman has that is stronger than anything else is to protect her children. And she will not report a crime against herself if she thinks she'll be removed from her children and can't protect them. These are the times in which we're living. And so we have to be active and we have to speak out. And so yes, there are certain emails and texts that I send out with an exclamation point.
All right, okay. Do you It's early, but do you want to run for president in 2020?
I'm not giving that any consideration. I got to stay focused.
You got to stay focused.
I got to stay focused. There's so much happening right now.
Okay,
so
I'll
that's
take
what
that
I'm
as a yes.
focused on.
Lorraine, the last question, then we'll get to questions. You were just saying we should bring that up. Was it the environment or?
No, that was Sessions.
Sessions.
That was just about.
So you would like to keep your medical marijuana also, in other words? No, or no, the
Grandma's medical marijuana.
No, but just the incarceration.
Yeah. That he's rolling back criminal justice.
Last thing I'm going to ask you, and then we'll absolutely get to questions, is you are making a lot of environmental investments at the Emerson Collective. Paris Accords. Reaction?
Well, I think like everyone, I agree it would be a colossal mistake for the United States to pull out of the Paris Accords for every reason that's already been outlined. Obviously economic, obviously that's the wave of the future. Obviously that's where the momentum is. And so for us to obviously, Secretary Clinton actually spoke about this beautifully. When we abrogate these international treaties that were created by predecessors, we weaken our word, our power, our effectiveness around the world, and that's pretty obvious. And then and it's also a big mistake for us to pull ourselves out of that. I think the world order in this way, that would be so chaotic and sabotage the economic future of the United States.
And investments you're making.
There's so many reasons why it's a really bad move.
Okay, questions from the audience? Right here.
Hi, Josh Topolsky, The Outline. So you talked a lot about truth, universal truth, which I'm a big fan of, truth generally. But how do you speak truth or talk about truth to people whose entire vehicle for their vehicle is the derangement or perversion of truth, and that the tool they use is to take what is true and turn it into something that is a complete lie? So how do you raise up away from like, okay, we're all reasonable here and we agree on some basic truths, right? Mm-hmm. Paris Accord, really good idea. Mm-hmm. But if you can twist that and make it into something that sounds dangerous and scary and worrisome to a large group of people, or is something that's completely untrue, how do you use, like, how does language work there, and how would you see it working?
So thank you. That's a wonderful question. I'll use your example, Paris Accord. The way that I might think about talking about it is not about necessarily greenhouse gas emissions or about scientists. And my mother was a scientist. I love science and I love scientists. But I would talk about it just based on just the basic fundamental issue there. Everyone needs to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And if you're talking with a family in Flint, Michigan, or in some places in Ohio, or some places in the South, where that is not something they can rely on, they'll hear that because they know they can't rely on it. And that's a universal truth. And I think we have, there's in certain African countries, when you meet someone for the first time, the greeting is not pleased to meet you. It's, I see you. I see you. I see you in your full relief in all the contexts and parameters in which you live. So I see you, the mom who is trying to get her kids to school every day, and you understand, and you understand something about what her existence involves, including that she just wants her kids to have clean water and clean air. Seeing people in the circumstances in which they live, and then talking with them in a way that acknowledges that we see them for all the dimensions of who they are. That's what I mean by universal truths as much as anything.
And Lorraine, since you own media and thinking about this.
I think, though, what you're asking is how do we combat the malfeasance and a lot of the manipulation with evil intent that we've seen in this last election and in the last year. And I think that responsibility actually rests on the shoulders of the tech community to figure out how do we look at this, how do we recognize that this is happening, and what are the next steps. The great thing about people in this audience and all the companies you represent, is that we're problem solvers. And I think people really need to think about how do we get back to that place where we can acknowledge and recognize the same base of facts and truth, because we've lost it.
But I would also add that I think it's really important that we don't, that there's nothing about our tone or the inference of what we're saying that suggests that people who voted one way were less intelligent or informed than we are. That is a mistake, because it's actually not necessarily accurate. And so there is that part of it, which is in speaking truth and wanting to then convince someone that the Paris Accord matter, that greenhouse gas emissions are a real threat, that CO2 is a real threat. Let's not say, so for you to support some other perspective makes you dumb. Let's take it back to the thing where we can actually agree. We need clean water and clean air. And so let's all agree that's a priority for us, and we don't want anyone who's going to threaten that and our access to clean water, clean air. I'll give you an example of, like, again, there's so many examples of California and what we have done that show the connection between a clean air and having policy priorities and people in elected office care about the significance of greenhouse gas emissions, vehicle emissions. And I'll give you an example. We're in Southern California. Anybody remember coming to LA like in the 80s?
Yeah, it was smoggy.
It was awful. It was so thick, the smog, right? You'd sneeze, people get asthma. It was awful. And then what happened? There was a policy decision. Hey, guess what? The vehicle emissions are contributing to that thing happening. We're going to change the whole deal. And now you can see the sky in LA. And so we have examples of the connection between these points, so we can show people the math and the dots, but ultimately the point is you want to breathe clean air.
Getting down to it.
Yeah.
Hi, John Ford from CNBC. Question for Lorraine. I think we're watching Mark Zuckerberg, the man who taught us how to connect electronically all over the world, go dining room table to dining room table across middle America, trying to connect to people who he somehow couldn't connect to otherwise. And he understood that differently throughout 2016. From your position of trying to affect policy and the future, do you find that personal connection or that cultural disconnect something that you also need to bridge? And is there some kind of message for Silicon Valley's elite, many of whom are sitting in this room, about the need to do that?
Also, she did do this photography project that was quite remarkable. I thought very deft in terms of bringing photographs everywhere across the country. So I thought that was super interesting. But are you going on a tour to touch livestock?
No, I'm not going on a tour. But I think that Brian Stevenson, when he speaks about proximity, is exactly right. And something that Kamala was touching on, sometimes it's very difficult to put yourself in another person's shoes unless you actually meet that person, or perhaps if you're sharing a meal with that person. For 20 years, I've been working in communities and working directly with students who will be first in their families to go to college. And even to this day, I'm a college counselor for first-gen college students. And so I actually have the great good fortune of knowing students and families directly. And I work in East Palo Alto and Oakland and in the Bayview and sometimes New Orleans. And so I actually do get that exposure. I think it's essential for me. And I respect Mark a great deal, because I think he found that it was essential to him to have that proximity, to take the time and sit and listen so you can really and truly understand the problems that you're trying to solve as they're experienced by the people that you're seeking to serve.
So you don't have to go far,
Well, East Palo Alto is about 2 miles from my house, so no.
Yeah, I would urge
in fact, no one in this room has to go very far to be proximate to issues that may not touch them directly, but touch people in their communities directly.
What about the people you're seeking to convince? Is there an equal or approximate need to have that same sort of meeting with them?
I'm not sure I know what you mean by the people I'm trying to convince.
Well, I mean, and not at all to diminish what you said. I think it's very important. You're talking about the communities who you're hoping to affect with your policy, kind of directly connecting with them. But there are other communities who see this as a zero-sum game, who might feel threatened by those efforts. Is there a need to connect with those communities who, residents of California might be missing? The Rust Belt, Appalachia.
Okay, so yes. I'm not only talking about doing work in a couple of communities in California. If you take XQ for an example, we have visited 58 cities and communities. We've gone from the East Coast to the West Coast to the East Coast 3 or 4 times, taken many different routes. I was just myself recently in Detroit, but XQ's been in the last couple of months in Indiana and Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio. And so I think it's important to go everywhere because pain and suffering is felt across the country and in different ways. And so you really, but there's also creativity and innovation and massive ingenuity within communities. So if you understand that the wisdom and the collective problem solving resides within communities, and you want to actually be a facilitator for those problems to be solved, then that's, I think, the only way that sustainable solutions actually happen.
I think what Mark was saying yesterday was also the same. They don't want to just come in and you tell them what to do. Like, here, be like us or something like that. Was an interesting observation.
Well,
you're not going to visit
accurate
the
or
people.
useful or sustainable. I mean, we have enormous talent and ingenuity and IQ dispersed across this world. We do not have opportunity equally dispersed across this world.
That's a really good point. Tammy?
I applaud all your efforts, but I have to ask you, as I hear you, both of you speak, wouldn't it be great if you look at the successes in changing hearts and minds this year? You've got the Women's March, you have the Climate Change March, you've got a variety of things. If you just gathered people, look at Sheryl Sandberg, what she did with Lean In. If you just gathered people, all the efforts you have, all the organizations you have, and stand behind one issue, or stand up front, take paid ads, all the ways we know how to influence people. I just feel like you two could make such a great change. What about picking one thing? Wouldn't everyone gather with them? Like Hillary Clinton said, they need money. This is for, democratic politics. But to your issues, if you put money directly behind paid ads, you can change all the hearts and minds you're talking about. What about taking that kind of leadership role and gathering everyone in this room and all around the country behind you?
I would suggest that we think about perhaps one theme as opposed to one issue. The Women's March, for example. When I spoke at the Women's March, so as I was the first woman elected DA of San Francisco, I was the first woman elected AG of California. Reporters would come up to me with this very original question: so what's it like to be the first woman, fill in the blank?
Yeah.
And I'd always say, well, I mean, I don't really know what to tell you because I've always been a woman, but I'm sure a man could do the job just as well, right? So then people would come up to me, okay, but talk to us about women's issues. And I would look at them and I'd say, I am so glad you want to talk about the economy. Right? Because as we know, when you lift up the economic status of women, you lift up the economic status of families and neighborhoods and communities and society. Okay, Women's March. Let's talk about women's issues. Fantastic. Let's talk about national security. Let's talk about climate change. Let's talk about criminal justice reform. Let's talk about immigration. I think we lose, to your point, you want to capture the audience. I think we lose the audience when we think of them as fitting into any one discrete box. And I'll go a step further. After the election this past November, There was a conversation that was taking place in certain circles, and the conversation was, did we lose that white unemployed man who lives in Scranton or Lansing? And I had a problem with that conversation. The inference was that to do that, we're going to have to shift away from that Latina or black mom. Now, that's a mistake for a couple of reasons. One, because supposed leaders have made the mistake of when they go into the black church, all they want to talk about is criminal justice reform. When they go into the community center in the Latino community, all they want to do is talk about immigration. Well, guess what? Back to my point about what people wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about. Those two ladies and that man have almost everything in common in terms of what wakes them up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And it is all those things. That is the full and complete way they live their lives. And so let's think about one theme perhaps as opposed to one issue. That's my perspective. And it would be truly about universal truths about how we live our lives. We want our children to be healthy and safe and educated well. We want to know our parents have access to health care and they're not paying an exorbitant amount for prescription drugs. We want to know that we live in a safe community, that we have a job with all of the benefits we need, and we can retire with dignity, and someone's not going to engage in predatory lending practices or predatory student loan practices. Some basic stuff. And so see people where they are, but I think that the one universal truth is we have to deal with the economic status of the vast majority of people in this country. And when we do that, we also have to understand, back to the point, that it's not just one issue. In order to deal with that, guess what we need to talk about? We need to talk about affordable child care. Because I can't get a job and keep a job if the salary that I'm making just puts me at net zero if I have to pay for child care. So I would suggest that we multitask.
And Lorraine? Lorraine?
Well, I think what you're hearing is that when you pull a thread, the entire fabric comes. When you're working with individuals, there is no silver bullet. Unfortunately, there is no single issue. Everything is connected, and everyone is interconnected. And so at first, when I first started out 20 years ago, I was of the same mind, and I thought that if we could just give an excellent education to every student, every classroom that we work with, that will change their lives, and thus it'll change their families' lives. There will be ripples upon ripples, and then families and communities will change. And while it's true, and there's great beauty and power in one life changed, it's also not true at all, because those students who are the first in their families and they have entirely different educational outcomes than everyone else around them, they, as much as they want to return to their communities and be part of the change of their communities, there's no job for them once they're college graduated. And they're also, when they're the first in the family, they're also the translator. They're also the one in the family that solves problems. And so they have to figure out immigration status, and they have to figure out how to support their parents, and they have to figure out how to get child care for their siblings, etc. So, and then the whole issue of healthy water and soil and air comes into play. And then, and so once you start trying to remove obstacles for individuals and unlock human potential, you realize there are concentric circles that you must work in if you actually want individuals to have sustained change.
Right, but if you stand in front of an audience, go to the National Mall and say what you said, people would follow you. That's my point.
So are you running in 2020?
Well, one of us should.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, Karen, did you
I think we'd all support you. Thank you so much. This has been a great panel. My name's Karen Friedman. I'm a consumer advocate in Washington, D.C. I work with thousands of retired truck drivers and construction workers who are losing their pensions. I totally agree with you, Senator. These guys care about keeping the promises made to them, but they also care deeply about their children. And, you know, I've been sitting here for 2 days, and I've been amazed at the innovation in this room, but these very people are sort of feeling lost in this new economy. This is sort of a question for both of you, but what about like a New Deal
Yeah.
Something that I know now because everybody's anti-government, but why can't we create something between Silicon Valley philanthropists, the government, to create jobs, to create, a retirement system that works for the future? You'd have the tax base to pay for it. You could do retraining. You could create new jobs in this economy. Because I don't think that, the thing that's been really hitting me listening to people is that, these guys are the innovators. They're not going to solve all the problems. Government still has that role.
Yeah.
So I'd like your opinions on that.
Briefly, and then drinks. Go ahead.
Well,
New Deal?
I'll say absolutely. I totally agree with you. And at Emerson, we talk about it as social compact 2.0. We need to forge a new social compact, recognizing all the realities, all the things that we know now, our connectedness, the opportunity, the connection between business and government and civic society. So I agree with you, and I think it will take everybody in this room and many, many more people to gather around and reframe how we want to be on this planet.
I agree, and I agree with the capacity of the people in this room to really be a part of a substantial coalition is profound, and it's about government has to be a part of this. And I know that there are a lot of folks who would just like government to leave them alone and let them do their business, but government exists. And government has a unique ability to allow what we're incubating here to scale up. And that's an important thing to always remember. Government has the capacity to scale up. And so, and it also has to be about the application of technology to everything that we are doing. So I'm also obsessed with the need for adoption of technology by government, because that's a huge issue and a problem. And so that's where the tech industry and all of the leaders come in. But then also it is about helping inform what we do when we set up a meaningful training, national training priority. And I think, again, through our community college system, we have the skeleton there, which is the community college system of our country. 2-year, give people a 2-year process of getting, and it's not about a degree, it's about a certificate. When they want a job, not a cap and gown.
Yeah. Well, that's
and
why
so
business
right,
needs
and
to
so
be
right, and so business has to be a part of it. So business helps inform the curriculum based on what jobs need to be filled. And we have a lot of jobs in this country that need to be filled, and they're not necessarily high skill.
Mm-hmm.
But we do need to improve the skills and skill up, if you will. And that's going to be, it has to be a public-private partnership. And this industry will be a phenomenal leader in that partnership. And we should talk about how we're going to continue to have everyone get together in one room, so to speak, a virtual room, and work on this.
All right. I'm so glad you're friends, because you're very interesting together. Thank you so much. Thanks, Kamala Harris. Great job. All right. Nightcap drinks in the lounge. Thank you so much. Tomorrow we have Cecile Richards. We've got Steve Case, who's sitting up there, Rise.